Good afternoon. I'm Roger Barton, and this is the first of the four series that our firm is sponsoring for Global Entrepreneurship Week. I've got today with me Dave McTague and Riley McTague, who I'll introduce to you guys in a moment. But what I'd like to talk about is just the series of events that we're going to have throughout the week. Today is Entrepreneurially Speaking, what it takes to build a successful brand. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., we're going to be hosting Transatlantic Entrepreneurship together with British American Business, JetBlue, Willis Towers Watson, the Cat and the Dandy, and the Alumni Network. We're going to discuss what it is to be entrepreneurial both here in the US and in the UK, and the challenges, but also opportunities that go along with that. So that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. All of these programs, including today's, you could register for through our website at bartonesq.com. On Wednesday, we're going to introduce the Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow together with Build, which is a national non-for-profit that teaches entrepreneurial skills to high school students in inner cities and under-resourced environments. We're going to be joined by Michael Katz of M Particle, who's a tech partner with NBC Universal partnership, and with Build CEO Ayeli Shakur. And the two of them are going to be interviewed by a Build alumni student, Ori Fernandez, on what it is to be an entrepreneur in this day and age as a younger person, and what that can be learned from the seasoned veterans. Finally, on Thursday, we're going to have the ESG panel, which will focus on the climate change finance initiatives, which is particularly relevant coming out of COP26. We're going to have on the panel Nick Ogerty of Carbon Finance Labs, Michael Vigario of ACT Commodities, and Carl Weatherly White of Advantage Capital to talk about the opportunities in the ESG space, particularly the E of the ESG for finance initiatives. So that'll be the week's programs. The one on Thursday takes place at 12:30. And again, you can get all this information on our website at bartonesq.com. But today, I'd love to welcome the McTagues, Dave and Riley, to our first session. And I think as most of you have registered for this session realize that Dave is a veteran of the industry of apparel and branding. He's been at this for more decades than he probably wants to admit, so I won't call him out on that.
Thank you.
But he has been with and created major brands, including Cole Haan, Liz Claiborne brands, Victorinox, Tommy Hilfiger, and on, including the driving force behind the Ellen DeGeneres brand, where he's sitting in LA right now getting ready to. He's not going on the show, but he will be dealing with the Ellen show today.
That's right.
And I'll let Dave give you, the more detail on his background. And Riley is next generation, and together they formed Search and State, which is an apparel business in the cycling industry. And there's some exciting journeys there as well. So let me start, Dave. Why don't you give us some of your background? Let folks, know the master that they're speaking to, so we can really, dig deep into some questions for you. And speaking of questions, I'm going to monitor the chat. Let's try to make this interactive. So anybody who's got a question, throw it into the chat. We will take them as they come, or I'll try to group them together in a way that makes sense for these two guys to be here for you. So Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Roger. Very much appreciate the opportunity. Thank you everybody for joining. The question that Roger posed me was what makes me such an expert, which is a frightening question. I would say number one is experience, because I have been at this for quite some time. It's shocking to think I've been in this space for almost 40 years now. But started in retail buying, product development, a fast growing chain in Washington, D.C. called Britches of Georgetown, which in and of itself was a lightning fast growth story. Bought by a PE way back then, which is interesting. Moved to New York and thought this industry is incredible. I spent a lot of time in sourcing and production because candidly, it was the only job I could get. And they sent me around the world. So I had a great fortune to be throughout Southeast Asia, spending a lot of time in China, India, Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, Pakistan, and then through Europe, understanding and learning the manufacturing and sourcing business. I then came upon a gentleman who at the time was president of Ralph Lauren, a veteran carpetbagger named Edwin Lewis. For anyone in the industry, they know of him. He wouldn't survive in today's generation, but back in the day, he was the man. And I remember getting an interview with him, trying to figure out how can I get into the big brand space. And he basically looked at my resume and he said, boy, you don't have anything. You don't know anybody and you haven't sold anything. So my suggestion is go get a job and sell something. So I did. And fortuitously for me, he then moved to Tommy Hilfiger. He basically refused to hire me. And then a new president came in. She hired me as a sales rep for specialty stores on the East Coast. And 9 months later, I was national sales manager, then off to the races. I was VP of sales, became president of Tommy Hilfiger. I deserve no credit. I think that it's only about all the people around me, really, honestly, is the only reason I had success. I worked with some of the most extraordinary people, still to this day, I've ever worked with at Tommy. And it was a magical place. It was purely entrepreneurial. No one could even pronounce his name, but it did enable us to do some really phenomenal things. So sales and planning, merchandise planning became a new industry. Now a company doesn't function without having planners. But going from Tommy, we got it up to about $1 billion. I left the company, started my own startup, a SaaS model, web-based global sourcing platform. That business, I had the great fortune of working with the Old May Company, to Gucci, Target, Federated Merchandising Group. And about 2 years into it, we were bought by a very big company, and they broke it apart for pieces as Tommy and Joel called me back in to Tommy because it had kind of, the bloom came off the rose a bit. And we rebuilt the whole team and grew the business again. So several times going through taking it public. Joel finally retired, Joel Horowitz, who was, I would consider one of my extraordinary mentors. He and Tommy, Silas Chow, Joel, Lawrence Stroll, and they were an incredible team. And I left and went to this little brand in Ebach, Switzerland called Victorinox. You know them for their knives. I helped build out their apparel and accessories and then global retail footprint. And while I was deep into that, Mark Parker called me from Nike and said, hey, we see some of the things that you've been doing. We've got this little brand called Converse that we own. We would love to activate apparel and accessories there. So would you come help us do that? And the theory being, you know, with an incredible consumer network that they sell, can we sell one t-shirt for every pair of Chucks? So that was the model. We ended up doing extraordinary things there. We worked on the athlete side. We worked on the artist side, the rock and roll side. It was a fantastic brand. We launched a $500 million business at Target with Converse One Star. And then we also launched an upper tier brand with John Varvatos at Bloomingdale's and the department stores, which was very successful until John started his own competitive brand, which was actually hysterical. And then I was recruited out of there. Mark Parker asked me to come and run global apparel at Nike. I got out there, but at the time I had 3 little kids and East Coast base, that wasn't going to work because I was working 100 hours a week and would have been traveling. And I ended up going to Liz Claiborne with this young CEO, Bill McComb, who was out of Johnson & Johnson, complete fish out of water. He gave me incredible opportunities, a very, very smart guy. I would credit him to being probably my second most influential mentor. And I ran 30 brands there from DKNY to Liz Claiborne, obviously. We did some very cool things there. And as that started to kind of sell off all the parts of Liz Claiborne, from a $5 billion company down to one, Kate Spade, Mark Parker called me again and said, "Hey, Dave, we've got another project for you. This old sleepy brand, Cole Haan, we're losing money. We got to figure out how to grow this thing." So I with a huge team, reinvented that business. And 30 months later, we sold it for almost $600 million, making a lot of money. And from there, I pivoted because I didn't want to be, part of a bunch of CEOs with the new PE firm that bought it. So I partnered with someone who I had met when I was at Liz Claiborne, Marisa Gardini, who is a brilliant, brilliant woman. She ran Isaac Mizrahi for 15 years. And she and I got together and were introduced to Ellen DeGeneres. And we, for the last 7 years, built Ellen's consumer products business. Now it's about a $350 million business in the home space, pet space, apparel, accessories. And then most recently, because of all of what we have done with Ellen, we actually started a second company called Prosper Brands. And this is an opportunity where we're working with stage 1 or stage 2 brands and accelerating them through whether it's brand audit, positioning, design, marketing, but most importantly, activating retail relationships and operational execution. So that's really what we've been doing now. And then Riley and I met a gentleman, and I'll let him talk about Search and State, which is kind of our newest passion.
Riley.
If everybody's not asleep at this point.
No one's sleeping. But Riley's got the shorter story, I'm sure. So what, I mean, I got a lot of questions about working with your dad, but besides that, tell me about Search and State.
Yeah, so I can give you a 10,000 foot view, and then we can click down as much as anyone would like or care. Because I like we said before that we pretty much can talk about anything that anyone wants to for as long as you want to, or as long as you'll be on the chat. But I'll click down into Search and State. First, taking a step back to say, one, why Search and State? So Search and State, a nice comparative analogy is to Lululemon, to say we found a very, very nice niche community in an extremely fast growing market. For those, quants out there, that market for global cycling apparel looked in the neighborhood of, $7 billion market cap pre-COVID. Has now expanded to over 12 billion since COVID. So a very, very nice tailwind in terms of total addressable market. We found not only that it was expanding again at a CAGR of over 7%, which is something we can definitely chew on for a number of years. It also was in that viral niche community similar to Lululemon. Now, Lululemon 20 years ago, though in hindsight says, oh, this is such an incredible innovative company in the space that makes too much sense. But 20 years ago, no one was doing yoga. The level of access to yoga studios and democratizing that as an activity for exercise was nowhere to be found but Bali and parts of LA, right? So it in hindsight didn't seem like a natural fit. But when we started to really dig into cycling, and Dave is kind of this avid endurance athlete. That is not my trade. I'm in much shorter sprints, more lateral movements, being a Division I lacrosse player for many years. But we found too much synergy between, again, a brand that I think as True North is very aspirational. An extremely profitable company that took 20 years to really grow. And I think a lot of people say, oh no, they've always been huge, and it's really not the truth. So they took a growth path that was very aspirational. It was in a very niche viral community that they began to grow with, leading with product. The only difference between, what we find us in the cycling industry to Lulu in the yoga market was that cycling is actually growing much faster and expanding from a market cap perspective, exponential relative to what yoga was at that time. So we found, again, a very quantitative approach. But as you'll see throughout this talk, I'm very literal in my approach from a quantitative perspective. So we had to make sure that the numbers worked out. But the ties to Lululemon and a very organic community that was not only viral but global, and actually more popular outside the United States. It was all too perfect for us to not dig into something that we really could chew on here. Now, Dave had introduced me to the brand from a sportswear perspective. Us just being product geeks, again, in New York City for a number of years, being able to kind of put your nose to the concrete here and figure out kind of what's the next cool thing. One jacket, one cycling jersey kind of rose to the top for Dave, and then for myself to say this is actually highly differentiated from a product cut and make perspective, because again, when it is your trade and you walk through retail, it's a very different experience than an average Joe walking through retail, right? You're touching, feeling the product, understanding and trying to back into where it was sourced from, how it was made, is it ethical, is it sustainable, right. All those types of things, just because you're in it 24/7, right? So we found too many synergies there. I was introduced again through one jacket and one jersey. So we knew that the product being 100% handmade in New York City, after talking with the creative director and founder at the time, we found so much differentiation to what was out in the market in cycling and in sportswear at large. So that is kind of the origin story in terms of how we thought about the opportunity from an investment perspective, and a product and an emotional perspective, to say this is something that not only the market needs, but that I think with our approach from a brand building perspective can grow in an authentic way, similar to a Lululemon-like company. So that's just, again, a very, very high level view, maybe a little too quantitative, but that was our approach into Search and State.
That's awesome. And I want to get back, I want to get more granular in a minute, because there's so many things you touched on we can come back to in terms of, performance-based apparel and all of that, but and the whole athleisure, movement, if you will, because sure there's a lot of people wearing Lululemon that don't do yoga, right? But let's just kind of back it up a little bit, because talking about branding more generally, right? Because someone's going to pay a lot more money for, a sweatshirt with a logo on it that they recognize and feel good about, or a pair of sneakers, or whatever it may be, than that same item without the logo, right? So, maybe Dave, is to you, when you're thinking of building a brand, I mean, what does that take? I mean, is it just $1 billion and you put out a lot of advertising, or are there other strategies, or what is it to build? What are the drivers that go into building a brand?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the drivers now, Roger, are different than they were through many of my historical experience, because how the consumer shops and purchases has changed so radically. If we were in China, they've been only using this for 10 years. In the US, everyone's freaking out and they're so exasperated with, digitally native brands, and that's all there is. The reality is building a brand takes an extraordinary amount of things clicking on all cylinders. I think to Riley's point, there are lots of investment companies, PE, VC firms, as you're seeing partnerships constantly, even Scooter Braun's partnership with Carlyle Group. These are attempts to try to bring assets together. The one thing that I don't see consistently anywhere are true people that understand how to operate these businesses and how to activate them at retail, whether that's DTC or brick and mortar. There are many parts of the world, like the Middle East, where we're growing retail stores now and 2 brands that only 3 or 4% of the entire commerce is done through digital at this point. And 5 years from now, they're only looking at forecasting 13%. So, while it's a new thing in the US where someone can be an Instagram or a TikTok star, and trust me, everyone thinks that they have a brand. We have great fortune in an enormous amount of inbound opportunities that prosper brands. But the reality is it takes a very, very special formula of, like Riley said, a total addressable market that is growing, a keen focus on consumer and what the customer really wants, and then either a personality, an influencer, a marketing strategy to be able to activate that message out to these consumers, and ultimately then a retail and manufacturing partner group to be able to bring it to the customer. Capital is definitely a part of that equation, but it's not the first part. And you've seen, especially through COVID, so many of these one-trick pony unicorn type companies that blast social media. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month just pounding out. But if you look at their P&Ls, none of them are making money. So, that's an integrity conscience issue for me, to be able to run profitable businesses as opposed to just trying to create something to sell and then have a podcast, even though you now have $100 million, you've never run a company that's made money. So that's frustrating. And as we approach brands, those are some of the things that we look for. We like to work with people that work as hard as we do.
Interesting. Talk to me about the influencer market. I mean, it seems to me, when you align a brand with individuals, you can crash and burn if they do. How do you manage that?
Well, I'll take part of that. I'll let Riley jump in because he's a lot smarter than me and certainly significantly younger. But let's look at Travis Scott and what happened this week, right? Travis Scott has been untouchable. He is a gold mine. The amount of people in LA here that are tracking him, trying to do deals with him, several of which I know, one thing goes wrong, and that is a huge problem. Even with Ellen DeGeneres coming through COVID and Black Lives Matter movement, and things that happened at Warner Brothers on her show, she is one of the loveliest people I've ever met in my life. And I've never met anyone who works harder than her or is more charitable. But even someone like Ellen DeGeneres wasn't protected from something that can happen with this remarkably viral tool that I think is as much of a weapon as it is as an opportunity for brand or market growth. Right. I don't know if you have any point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we talk about it a lot in terms of how do you organically grow your customer base in an authentic way, right? And I think there might be, quote unquote, a bubble in the influencer marketing space, largely due to the proliferation, of influencers, believing that they can drive a diversity of revenue streams for themselves to be able to put on other brands. I think there's a ceiling there. In terms of its relation to authenticity, which I think is a super important part of building brand, and acquiring customers that retain and your product sticks with them, for you to be able to evangelize your brand on your behalf. So I think we talk about a lot in terms of influencer marketing relative to very similarly social media marketing, to say this kind of pay to play model, where you spend $5 on Facebook and you get an $8 return, and it's a simple math problem from there. But the problem is, one, when you stop investing your money into said platform or said influencer, the sales are directly correlated 1-to-1. Right. So you take $5 out, say goodbye to that, customer and that sale, because you don't have enough institutional, organization behind you to say, no, we're just as conscious about customer experience, retention as we are acquisition. So I think it all goes back to being authentic, and making sure that those channels of acquisition are authentic for you. Now, in relation to search and state, for an example, which is a good one because we don't spend any money on advertising whatsoever. We have to, again, it's not easy, and it takes a lot longer to be able to generate those those flywheels of growth. Excuse me. But we seem it to be ROI positive in the long term. Right. Because we're building in retention strategies and customer experience strategies in tandem with the positive externality, but also gaining more customers because we're building out these evangelists. We're incentivizing these evangelists and our influencers, which isn't pick your TikTok influencer that's able to give you a promo code that feels like you're getting sold on a platform you might like to consume entertainment. It's the local guy or girl that rides up and down what we call like our it's like a biking national speedway called 9W that runs from Manhattan all the way up to Bear Mountain. And there's thousands of riders a weekend that go up and down there. And our approach is to say, actually, let's find a couple of those guys and girls that we not only can bring into our company and understand that they'd have the same mission, vision, and values, but are able to bring in other like-minded people like themselves to be able to build a community around. So that's kind of our approach from a search and state perspective, and how we think about it kind of at a higher, more fundamental level.
We got a question that came in through the chat that relates to Kobe Bryant and body armor.
Yep.
And whether, the longevity of his influence and the narrative, is he truly authentically believed in the company? And I think, that question can be expanded to, again, pick your celebrity influencer whose star, is going to rise and fall, hopefully not fall, but typically it does, or at least fades out. How do you employ that strategy? What are the layers that go into that?
Well, it's funny. I think that's a good question. And thank you, Chris, for that question. $5.6 billion has a nice ring to it, right? I think that the fact that Kobe was thought of as a very authentic guy when it came to business, that certainly helped create that valuation. The longevity of that valuation with Kobe, I think, is certainly waning. But if you compare it to Magic Johnson and even Shaquille O'Neal, because we've spent a lot of time in the athlete space, certainly with my 10 years at Nike, the difference with a Magic or a Shaq was Magic, when he got an endorsement deal, and most people think brand building, they confuse brand building with endorsements. There's a grave difference between an equity stakeholder, someone who's working and driving the business, versus someone who's just getting paid to do an ad. And what Magic did, what was brilliant, was when Starbucks came to him and said, hey, we'd like to give you a $10 million endorsement deal. He said, no, you know what? I don't want the deal. I want locations and I want to own them. And then he took that to Kentucky Fried Chicken, same thing. And he has amassed a multi-billion-dollar fortune by not only reinvesting in the neighborhoods of all of the kids that supported him growing up, many of them underprivileged, but that's a model, and to Riley's point, a flywheel that I have an enormous amount of respect for. And Shaq has done that with General Insurance and so many other things. Like the really savvy, smart athletes and the ones that are authentic, you're seeing them be owners and investors as opposed to just getting paid an endorsement fee. And many of the folks, Roger, that we work with, and too, endorsements are fantastic while you're getting paid. As soon as that one's done, they are endlessly looking for the next deal. And I think what is becoming a larger sense of awareness, and I think precipitated by the enormous wealth in the world now and access to capital, is just people would much rather be owners. Ashton Kutcher, a brilliant tech investor. These are people that, Ryan Reynolds, you're not seeing Dwayne Johnson. These are guys that are brilliant tactical investors. And those are the kind of folks that we like doing business with because they are all in. And to Riley's point, they're thinking about the analytics behind it, the consumer base, and then what they have to do to help activate those brands, which is a little different from Kobe, but good question on Kobe.
Awesome. You keep, both of you've used the word authentic so many times over. In your world, what does it mean to be authentic in the context of these brands?
I mean, for me, it is quite simple. It is in building out the brand and clarity internally facing on the mission, the vision, the values, the strategic imperatives, all the things that anybody can read a basic marketing book and say, hey, these are critical things that every brand needs to have to run their day-to-day operation. And they also create the filters by which the company makes decisions about activating product or marketing strategies or retailers that they want to work with. Authentic is walking the walk. You know, you're not seeing and you can see it in the celebrity marketplace, which is obviously where we spend an enormous amount of time, from the celebrity who just wants to do the endorsement deal. We've met with very, very popular celebrities who came in and said, listen, Dave, Marisa, we would love to do this with you guys. Just give me $10 million and do whatever the hell you want. And that was the last time we met with them. Authenticity is really showing up and being all in. And when you see folks that have charitable connectivity to their mission, it's just more than a transaction, and it's more than just making money. Like Riley said, we could activate search and state in a maniacal way, but we're choosing to do it organically, thoughtfully, because we're playing at the top end of the luxury market in cycling. This is the Prada of cycling. We don't need to sell a lot of product, but the fact that it is globally architected and we have one bike shop roughly per country or major city, that's a very different model. Like 9W Riley spoke about, which it runs right along the Hudson River, just on the Jersey side. If you go there on any given Saturday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a couple of spots that you can stop for coffee. There's probably no less than $10 million worth of bikes that are in racks there. Like, this is a huge, huge marketplace. And the authenticity is really about that. It's being part of the user community. You know, the old adage of those who can't teach. Well, in this case, we really want people that do what they're selling. They're really invested in it. And that authenticity, I think, comes through to the consumer loud and clear.
And Riley, from your perspective, generationally, I think authenticity for the younger generation has another layer of meaning, where you're looking at supply chain, you're looking at partners, you're looking at sustainability, you're looking at all of those types of factors. When you were putting together Search and State, or even now as you're running it, how do you think about those things? How do you solve those things, particularly, you know, when you have a global pandemic and maybe your supply chain becomes constrained and you need to look at alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, that all matters because, again, we've set our mission, our vision, our values, and always have that, again, as the backbone of our brand and our company from an organizational perspective, to be able to use that as true north. So I think regardless of how you approach your supply chain and logistics management, and how sustainable or humane you are or not, I think that matters less, only because you need to ask the question, does it make sense for you and for your brand? And is that the mark you want to leave? Now, I think in my generation and younger, you know, from like a Gen Z perspective, the only reason brands are doing it now are not to constrain their margin profile, because it is much more expensive. But it is because there's been so much outsized demand with companies like Everlane that went to market and found differentiation in their product from a value proposition perspective in that of their supply chain, because people, one, were more educated on what was going on. Now, I think if Dave talked to you 20 years ago in Hong Kong, what was going on there and what's going on now, it would be, you know, like you would never be able to get off the floor. But I think just with the resurgence and the wave of direct consumer brands after the 2008 crash, we saw a lot of popularity in the sustainable and humane space because it won. There was a lot of competition in apparel and accessories, honestly, regardless of your industry. But you needed to differentiate. So they found in their supply chains. Now, for a certain state and how we've approached it, we use, again, I'll use another analogy of brands and companies that are very aspirational for us. Apple is a great example in terms of owning their supply chain from soup to nuts. And not only has that allowed them to scale and reach a level of economies of scale across the board, regardless of their department or the product that they decide to move into. But it also allows you to be much more nimble. Now at Search and State, we hand make all of our garments in New York City in the garment district. And again, are taking an approach to own our supply chain from soup to nuts. And that's not to say like an Apple, for example, are buying their factories, are buying the microchip companies and rolling them in from a corp dev perspective and an M&A perspective. Now, if we wanted to do that, yes, with a lot more liquidity and levels of investment, I'm sure we could scope out that path forward. Now, we actually are taking that same approach without the exposure from a cash flow perspective. So being able to own, again, all the factories we work in New York City, it's invite only. They're all family owned. We eat lunch with them every single day. We share a wall with them from our design studio. They are family. And same with our suppliers, being able to have that very, very tight-knit community, not only is incredible from a company building perspective and a mission, vision, and values to say that we're walking the walk every single day. And if you're part of our community, we'll let you under the hood and show you. But it also was an extreme differentiator over COVID to say and even now, even post-COVID, if you're in LA getting stuff from Asia, you're, 2 months, it's sitting on a dock, out at sea. If you got a dinghy, you can go out there and maybe get it, but it's going to be pretty darn tough. But for us, without even realizing it, we had a hedge strategy to say, not only do we have all this available fabric, we do all of our, cut, make, pattern work, design in-house. All of our, art is an in-house design process. So where it was most people's demise over COVID, we were able to not only be on trend to say if, this print, pattern, color, silhouette made sense for us, literally within one day, we could have the pattern made, a sample made, the fabric sourced, and able to be cut and made for 2 weeks in production time, which, Dave can attest that doesn't make any sense in fashion and apparel. Even remotely, like they're talking 9 months, not 2 weeks. So for us to be able to be that nimble was a huge accelerant for us to be able to ride that wave. Where others, it might have been a headwind, it was a tailwind for us.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, David? Because to Riley's point, it's probably expensive, it's less efficient. If you got a price point, I guess it could support it. But you got the other hand on the other argument, you're seeing all these manufacturers reassess their supply chain and are no longer want to be beholden to it as they were before. So where does the balance on that come out? But what are you seeing, the larger manufacturers and retailers doing?
From a sourcing perspective, you mean, Roger?
Yeah. How to shore up your supply chain and not be necessarily beholden to the next
listen,
crisis, whatever it may be.
As you know, we're working with brands from that are positioned and selling at Bergdorf Goodman as well as Walmart. And when I'm on the phone with, the heads of product development at Walmart and their global sourcing team, it's one conversation. I could be on another call with a sourcing team at TJ Maxx or Ross stores. And, some of these retailers are talking about the reality of missing Christmas and having product that they ordered, 12 months ago, not even make it in time for Christmas. And they're already anticipating, can they pack and hold it for a year from now? I think the answer is very complicated. What I've seen is a lot more activity to other countries of origin that don't have barriers of duty rates. We're all kind of at the mercy right now of the global shipping companies that I think has to end. The best of prognosticators have not said that the supply chain will be back in line before probably fall 23. So, part of the answer for us has been being nimble and being able to manufacture in the United States. We've also done in other brands that I'm running. We've worked in Central and South America, but all of them have their challenges. What is a travesty is that when I was a little boy, manufacturing was really a vibrant part of the ecosystem in the United States. I am seeing an enormous amount of investment and conversations with very large investment groups trying to create that sense of vertical manufacturing here again in the United States. So I think it's going to be it's a complicated answer, but it's definitely a balance. We've chosen at Search and State to do everything right here. And the ethical, sustainable side of it is part of the attribute that's positive for the brand. But category by category, it's very difficult. I'll give you one other example. The candle business, because we're in the home space, we're in the pet space, we're in food and beverage, all these different categories. You can pour and create the fragrance and everything here for candles, but the challenge is you can't get the vessels in, which are all made in China. So there are, in LA, there's 3 or 4 fantastic top level candle pourers, but they can't get the glass, they can't get the vessels. So that's where the breakdown is. Everyone keeps saying in the automobile industry, hey, don't have anything break in your car right now, because there's probably 4 months lead time to try to get that computer chip for your Tesla or your Lexus or whatever it might be. That's the domino effect of what this supply chain effect has had on everybody.
There's one question about brand ambassadors, and I want to save time to talk about money, because we really haven't talked about financing and all that, which I think is
definitely
when you're building a brand, there may be an exit. In terms of just
part of the deal.
Ambassadors,
yes.
When you think about a brand ambassador, do you think about it in terms of, is it product driven? Is the strategy change? I mean, somebody who's endorsing, a sandwich shop versus someone who's going to endorse, athletic wear, maybe different, or be the spokesperson. How do you think about those things?
Yeah, I saw that question. Thank you, Anna. Listen, it's not as complicated as the supply chain, but having even met with Kris Jenner and talking about how she has brilliantly architected all of her daughter's businesses, it can go one of two ways. The way we do it at Prosper Brands is, part of the magic sauce we have is our relationship and at a C-suite level with the retail community. We're talking with them literally multiple times a day about the vacancies and opportunities of space that they have in their product offering. We typically will then refine that to a consumer profile, then back into who might be a great ambassador for those two things. Equally, we'll get as many people coming to us saying, I am this person, and you would know all of them by name, and I want to be in this business. I mean, we will do the due diligence if we feel like they're a person that meets all of those criteria we talked about before, which is authentic and hardworking, and they're all in. So you can work it that way too. I think it's a combination, and it depends on the category. It also depends on the consumer you're going after. It could be the D'Amelios that are the #1 TikTok, influencer in the world right now. And there are plenty of things that are opportunities for them, and they're getting their doors knocked on every single day. Or it could be a P&G who is coming to us with a particular product that says, who can you all help us get? Can we get Travis Scott? Can we get whomever that might be? So it goes both ways. I think, that's not really a recommendation, Anna. I think it's more of a brief that says, if you have opportunities like that, I'm happy to talk to you about that and help you create that path from one side of the equation to fill in the rest of it.
Let's turn to the money part. We talk about building the brand and different strategies around that. Parallel or even before that, you're probably often thinking about how to finance all of this. Right. Financing it as you go along, financing it as you grow, and then ultimately there may be a transaction of some sort at the end to cash out.
Yeah.
Walk us through a little bit of that journey. What does that look like? When you're sitting in a room with a whiteboard saying, let's create this brand, to the end of that. And of course, you're going to do that in like 7 minutes, but that's okay.
All right. I'll give you 3.5. I'll give Riley 3.5.
There you go.
So for 3.5, I'd say this. I think that there are multiple ways to start the capital conversation. The way Prosper, me and my partners approach it, because outside of Marisa and myself, we have a brilliant investment banker here in LA, one of the top attorneys here in LA, and one of the most prolific agents in LA. So that consortium, and then probably the most famous CMO in the world, is also part of our core partner team. This team of partners, we meet every single week, and the inbound feed, no different from a Blackstone. We're sitting there and talking about opportunistically, what do we have here? The capital will show up in very different forms. In some cases, we've got big money people just trying to activate an idea. In other cases, most cases, we've got an opportunity and a brand to be created. But what we do is we activate that with the retailer first. And the retailer then drives the capital build on that. And then we begin to network outside of that into other partners, whether that be a manufacturing partner, it could be a money or a capital partner. But generally speaking, that's how we start each of the opportunities, depending on what stage they're at.
Is it fair to characterize that? So you're sort of designing from the outside in. It's okay, what does the retailer, what does the consumer want? And then you back into how can we can create that and align the right team that's going to deliver on that?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the biggest opportunity is to have the relationships in the retail community to know what they need ahead of time, who the consumer is, and then be able to activate against that operationally. And I don't know any other firm that actually can do all that. When it comes to search and state, Riley, you want to take the ball on that one?
Yeah, I feel like this is like an economics class on like macro versus micro. But to double click to say not in a platform approach, more boots on ground. I mean, it goes back to one for me and for Dave. You want to spend as little time as possible fundraising because it takes it takes a lot of time and a lot of time away from operating. And when operating a business with a lean team, it can kill you before you can even start. So you certainly need to be able to scope that out, to Dave's point, prior to starting on a whiteboard, to say, here's, the capital restraints of the business, here's the barrier to entry. But it all ties back to the business fundamentals and the unit economics of the business, right? So if you're able to, again, in apparel with a, gross margin starting with a 4, it's going to be pretty darn tough. But there's a lot of interesting, now more than ever, hybrid types approaches, whether it's debt versus equity, or having, kind of like a revolving door with a factor. Right. There's a lot of interesting new and old ways that are repurposed and rebranded on how to inject capital into your company so you don't have to spend time fundraising, right? I think how we approach it, again, and why Search and State was so attractive is because that gross margin profile, was so much higher. So we knew that we didn't need as much fuel on the front end to be able to launch, prove out a thesis, and begin to really lay out a 3-5 year plan, and scope out the capital restraints of the business if we hit certain tranches. But again, I think it all goes back to the unit economics. We think about like a huge metric for us is like contribution margin. So not just the gross margin of the product, but also adding in any variable cost that we fit, that we find, like marketing, for example. And that's why you see now with a lot of direct to consumer companies going public and all of their documentation they need to present in order to go public, they have a lot of very interesting vocabulary around their different metrics, because they create them out of thin air to be able to pad the stats when trying to go IPO, or now SPACing is white hot. But we largely think about it from a unit economic perspective. Don't want to be fundraising, so do it as fast and as quick as we possibly can. But again, we want to be able to hedge if a COVID comes and we need to be able to buy 9 months, 18 months worth of product. To be able to be nimble, in real time, then we also scope that out as well. But that's how we've approached it from a micro level.
Let me ask you, in terms of people who may be on this call that are looking to create a brand, raise some capital and so forth, and you hear the term smart money, patient money,
yes,
all those types of things. When you guys go out and you're in a sort of high class problem, let's call it, where the players know you're in the club, so to speak. But there's a lot of folks that are starting up brands that just don't have that access.
Right.
What should they be looking for in terms of types of investors to bring in? Once you're past the friends and family round and you're starting to go to the more institutional rounds of financing, what should they look for? What should they stay away from?
Well, I mean, you said it right from the beginning, Roger. Smart money. Smart money can mean different things for different folks. Smart money for some can mean operational expertise, because they might be good at a concept, or they might be good at actually marketing it, but they're terrible at manufacturing it or bringing product to market. So smart money is either someone that can accelerate your business in real time, physically. It's not just about capital. There's more money available now than at any time in the history of mankind. So it doesn't mean you can get it, but the travesty is, and you see it so many times, when people give up such an enormous amount of equity in a very, very early stage, and then as the business, to Riley's point, naturally begins to grow and fuel is required normally for the scale, they end up with such a minority share of what they started that the company ends up just turning into something else that was never intended. And we see it time and time again, very famously, as well as a lot of anonymous. What I think is super encouraging right now in coming through this period that we just did is the amount of minority owned businesses that for the first time are really getting the kind of attention and spotlight on their opportunities than ever before. For women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, there has never been a greater time for someone to take an idea to the marketplace and say, hi, I think this is a fantastic market. Here's the consumer profile. This is why we are differentiated from everything else in the market. Now, can I receive help? And understanding the kind of help very candidly that you need is probably the most important part of gaining that capital, smart money, as you defined, and it's dead on.
That's awesome. I want to preserve the last few minutes for another entrepreneurial question that many folks face, and we have it right here on the screen, which is the multi-generational family business. So what have you guys learned working together? What is, how do you manage it? It looks like it's going well. What is your advice out there to family entrepreneurs?
I'll let Riley go first on that one.
All right. So it's what we talk about internally at Search State. Culture is a huge part of company building for Search State, and I think for branding at large. And to take a page out of Netflix culture book, and if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend digging in. It's in public record, but their Netflix culture book, which at the time was life-changing for founders alike. They talk a lot about running a company not as a family, but as a well-oiled sports team, right? And me being an athlete for so many years, it was very resonant for me and made a lot of sense. And that's to say, families by default are always supportive. But sports teams, it's a bit different, where if you continuously go against the mission, the vision, the values, the strategy, you will not always be supported. So we take a very formal approach as coworkers. I like to stay away from, hey, dad, in the office, or on a conference call, or on a team meeting, or on a partner call, but to treat it as if he's your partner. And that's for, sister, any kind of sibling, parent, or relative, to act as if you are coworkers. And then you're able, to have a lot of more open and honest conversations on your opinions, and you're always heard. So that's super, super helpful. But I take a more formal approach to the relationship, and it tends to work out pretty nicely.
Yeah, with 1 minute left, I would say, Roger, there's two comments. One, it's really just about mutual respect, which I think Riley said more eloquently. We are partners in this. We're not father-son, and we love doing it together. We don't always agree on everything, but we do have a methodology that helps us make good decisions together. Our partnership is based on we both agree or we don't do it, no matter what it is. And I think that works in the great relationship you have with your sons, and as successful as they are, the same thing. The other thing I would say is I love seeing through Riley's eyes and his lens, unfettered by all of my quote unquote experience, the opportunity that lies before us. That's really exciting. And that endless curiosity for me is the same thing as innovation. And that's what stimulates us every single day.
That's cool. Good. I couldn't have heard a better answer to that from both of you guys. That's fantastic.
Comes from the heart.
Yeah. Well, you could tell. I want to thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Roger.
And I know we got some good comments in the chat, so I think everyone enjoyed it. So
we really
thanks
appreciate
again.
it.
Thanks,
good luck in LA.
Thanks everybody for attending. We very much appreciate your time.
Take care all.
Okay, take care. Thanks, Roger. Good luck the rest of the week.